So when you're trading on Betfair, there are two states to the market, the pre-off period and the in-play period. If you're actually trading in play on Betfair, then one of the things that you need to take account of is the in-play delay. It can be as short as 1 second, or it could be 9 seconds, but there is a delay when you place a bet in play. Now, there's a story behind how that came about, but also how people were legitimately beating it without the use of fast pitches or being at an event. If you want to hear more about that, then watch the rest of this video. If you're interested in learning to trade on Betfair, then visit the BetAngel Academy, where you have detailed, structured Betfair trading courses. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon if you want notification of new videos as they're released. So I did a video recently talking about in-play and pre-off, and I touched upon an aspect of this market that was the in-play delay. It's worth elaborating on why that came about, how it affects what you're doing now, but also how it was possible to beat it. Most people think that beating the in-play delay is all about being at the event itself, but if you wait until the end of the video, there was actually an even cleverer way of beating the in-play delay completely legitimately, and you'd get in front of everybody else and effectively nullify the delay altogether. But wait till the end of the video when I reveal how that was done. But the in-play delay has always been there. If you go into horse racing, you'll get a 1 second delay. If you go into football, it could be a 9 second delay. But there's a reason for that delay, and the reason the delay was introduced on betting exchanges was basically to get over the transmission time to whatever device that you're particularly watching. So if you think about the way that pictures are transmitted from a sport event, there'll be an outside broadcast unit actually at an event itself. They will have a little desk there bringing the pictures in. That gets beamed up to a satellite. The satellite then beams the raw feed down into a studio where a producer decides what shots that he decides that he wants, and then they will beam that back out. Now, it could go via the internet, or it could go back up to the satellite and then back down to you. There are a whole number of different ways that all of that information comes, but effectively all of this bouncing up and down from the actual event to eventually you back at home, wherever you are, watching it on TV, on your phone, your tablet, your PC, or on a conventional TV, will experience a delay. There will be, you may have seen this during football competitions or whatever, or major sports. You'll often hear the guy down the street or next door cheering a few seconds before you, and you're sort of thinking, okay, they've scored. But yeah, the in-play delay was basically designed to mitigate the amount of time that it takes to go from the event to your screen. And it was seen as a way of leveling the playing field effectively. They wanted to make it impossible that somebody who was actually at the event itself can nip in front of you and beat you by basically getting slightly faster pitches. That's the reason the in-play delay was introduced. Now, the interesting thing is you've got different exchanges and they use more or less the sort of same delay. And the reason for that is that if they used a shorter delay, they'd probably get picked off by people who are at the event, and if they use a longer delay, then people won't bet with them because there's a shorter delay somewhere else. So it's an interesting sort of jumble of policies across different exchanges, but ultimately that's why you tend to find that Betfair has quite a lot of dominant in-play liquidity, is because they can sort of pacify both sides of that equation. They will have people that will be winning, but people will be willing to bet with them because there's liquidity, and also the delay is sort of about acceptable. And therefore they generate most of the liquidity, which introduces people coming in to bet on it in play, and so on. You know, it's a virtuous cycle effectively. But the difficulty for competitors is if they alter the delay, then they may find themselves falling into the trap of not being competitive or getting picked off, and therefore no liquidity gets generated within that particular market. So it's an interesting situation within the industry that you get that delay. If you want to get banned by a major bookie, go to a match or a course and bet on something slightly before it's happened, and they will identify you very quickly that you're picking off the in-play delay, and your account will be closed or heavily restricted. And you know, this is a game that has gone on for many years, because when the in-play markets were first introduced, people quickly cottoned on to the fact that if you're at the event itself, you would effectively be able to see the future. And what better way to be able to see the future? The only other way I know is to be Biff in Back to the Future and travel to the future, get an almanac, and then bet on it like he did in that film. However, the next best thing was to go to a live event and beat the in-play delay. Now, that sounds pretty good. And it was rumoured, actually, that an outside broadcast engineer who was transmitting pitches was in fact the first in-play millionaire on Betfair by betting on horse racing. Now, that's a rumour. I cannot confirm that. I do not know the information. And I have no idea if that is true, but it sounds perfectly plausible. If you think about it, in the very early days when in-play betting was around, people weren't so smart. And as a consequence, it's quite likely that he was able to pick off people left, right and centre. And it would have earned him a lot more to do that than necessarily to send some pictures up to a satellite somewhere. But, you know, ever since that happened, there have been loads of stories of people going out to try and get fast pictures. There have been a couple of controversies as well, where people have been caught doing this, and the tennis tour is very hot on this, and they will be actively looking to catch people out who are actually at a tennis match trying to relay the action back to somebody remotely. So it's frowned upon within sport because it's seen as an integrity issue and creating problems for the underlying sport itself. But the fact is, it does go on and has gone on for as long as I can remember. But the interesting thing is, when I first examined this area, I went to look at a horse race, and I thought that as the horse ran towards the post, then people would start lumping on the money at 101 because it was fairly obvious that it had won the race. Now, to my surprise, that wasn't the case, and in fact, the money was going down at 101 sometime before the actual winning post. But every time I've revisited that in recent years, you basically see that that length is getting bigger and bigger. You know, maybe a few years ago it was 1 furlong, and then it was 1.5, 2, and then 3 furlongs or more. And as a consequence, stuff gets backed in incredibly quickly whenever you look at those sort of things. I remember going to a tennis match to have a look and understand what the delay was. And what I was really interested in is whoever is in the audience somewhere, one of the spectators will be relaying information, or somebody somewhere will be doing it. How are they doing it, and when are they actually doing it? Was the most important question that I was looking for. And to my surprise, I was actually at the event, and I would be looking at a device, and then you'd see the odd shift, and you're sort of thinking, well, you know, there's a 3-5 second delay or whatever. They must have pressed that 3 or 5 seconds ago, and 3 or 5 seconds ago, you know, the returner had only just hit the ball back from the serve. So I began to realize that what's actually going on is that people are anticipating the situation. So when the in-play delay is there, obviously they've got to be really, really sharp, and at the front end of the sport, they know they can't beat the clock. So what they're actually doing is they're anticipating that something could happen, and they're putting their order in, you know, further and further back from where the action is. So eventually what happened to all the fast pitcher players was it became a skill game. Rather bizarrely, everybody thought that they were trying to just get pitches slightly faster than everybody else, but no, it actually developed into a skill game where people were anticipating what was going to happen and then placing their positions into the market ahead of that actually happening. Doesn't mean that it could happen. You know, the guy serves the ball, the returner tries to get it back, and then there's a fault called somewhere or something goes wrong. Suddenly they've got an open position. So it reintroduced an element of risk back into the equation. And you very often see this on football. People are doing exactly the same with football. They're trying to anticipate what the action is and jump on the back of that and hope that they get it right. If there's a free kick that's about to be awarded just outside the penalty area, people will often back that team with the anticipation of a free kick being awarded, even before it's been awarded, with the anticipation that then they're going to have a chance to shoot on target and perhaps score a goal from there. So over the years, rather than just being a way of exploiting the time delay between the satellite and everything else that's going on there, it's been seen as a process of skill almost. And there's quite a large war going on between people who are doing the same sort of thing. And very often, if you're looking for a strategy, they tend to over-anticipate things. That's how I've sort of seen things develop over the years. So, as you know, I predominantly trade pre-off, but I do some in-play stuff. And that was born out of watching so many races, because you began to realize that if you could learn to race read, if you began to understand what was going on the actual race course itself, that gave you a bit of an advantage. Because when I was watching races in between actively trading them, you would hear them sort of saying, oh, you know, so-and-so's moved out to the side and he's off the bridle. And you're sort of thinking, what does that mean? So rewind it, look at it, understand, Google it. And then you'd see people holding the rails, boxed up in mid-division. Sometimes they say, oh, so-and-so's having to give him a reminder, or he's jigging him along. He's only hands and heels at this stage. All of those little bits of phraseology that the commentators were offering, I began to appreciate and understand in a little bit more depth. So that allowed me to actually be able to race read effectively. And I can look at a race now and sort of say to you, no, he's not going to make it. Or, you know, he's in the wrong position. I can't see how he's going to win from here. And all of those sort of things. So there's a skill to it that's sort of hidden behind the most obvious things to do with the pictures. And in football, football's very variable, but you know, there is a skill in being able to interpret what's going on within the action itself. But let me give you a huge tip here. If you want to get really, really fast pictures on football, you don't have to go to the ground. You don't have to get some fancy satellite raw feed or whatever. Just pick up a radio, because that's what I've done for a very, very long time. Is if there's a televised match on, try and find a conventional radio, not a digital radio. Tune into it on AM or FM and listen to the commentary, because you will find that you are getting it almost instantaneously from the ground itself. And that is because it just gets transmitted straight out like that. It doesn't have to go up to a satellite and get produced. It doesn't go up to satellite at all. It just gets transmitted over the airwaves. So the fastest way to get information from a football match is to have a radio. And it's an old trick that's been used for many years that isn't particularly well known. But if we look at an even older trick, if we go back to the very, very sort of early days of in-play trading, everybody went through the same sort of process of going to an event, trying to see what the delay was. Exchange trading shops popped up all over the place that had slightly faster feeds than Sky and all of the other publicly available resources. But there was something funny going on in the market, because it seemed like somebody kept on beating the delay consistently. And there was a big debate raging about it back in the day. We're talking about sort of early to mid 2000s here, because every time that a sport was on, it seemed that somebody always seemed to get it right. And you're sort of thinking, well, that's impossible. There's something going on. How can they, you know, even if you were actually at the ground itself, you would sort of, you know, the goal, and then you sort of think, well, somebody's got in there before me. How is that possible that could occur? And suddenly suspicion turned to whether this was something that Betfair were doing or the exchanges. It just seemed a little bit odd that no matter how clever you were and how fast you could get those pictures, somebody always seemed to be beating you. So this debate raged on for a period of time, and then suddenly Betfair came out and announced that they were making changes to the way that in-play betting was done. And it was like, oh, well, that's a little bit unusual. But suddenly the penny dropped as to how it was all being done. And the way that it was being done is somebody would say, look at an attacking phase of a football match. There was a 5-second delay. They would stick £1,000 on that home team that were basically attacking and looked like they could possibly score. But at the same time, what they would do is they would go and place a bet somewhere else on a dead market with all of the funds within that particular account. If that team went on to score a goal, they would undo and cancel the bet or the secondary bet, and their initial bet would get matched, because it would go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cancel, matched. And suddenly the goal would go in and they would make a lot of money very, very quickly. However, if the attacking phase took place, the team went up, shot and missed, they would just let the secondary bet stand, and they wouldn't have enough funds in their account to actually put the in-play bet into the market. And it turned out the mistake that Betfair were making at that particular moment in time is they were actually looking at the account only when it was about to place the bet. So it would go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Have we got enough money in the account? Yes, we have. Place the bet. And that loophole was being exploited because the countdown would get to where the bet was being placed. Have we got enough money in the account? No, we haven't, because the secondary bet was being placed somewhere else. How clever is that? It's one of those things you sort of think, oh, of course, you know, I wonder who discovered that and how much money they made from it. And what did Betfair do about that? Because they must have known who it was at that particular moment in time. But anyhow, what Betfair did was they changed the way in-play betting was done so that the liability on a bet was checked when you actually placed the bet, not as the bet was going to be placed. So as soon as you hit that button in play, liability is checked immediately now, and there's no way that you can perform that particular action anymore. It must have made a decent sum of money for whoever discovered that before Betfair patched over that particular loophole. But yeah, when you're betting in play, it's always worth knowing that there is going to be a delay. It's worth researching how much that delay is, because that could affect the way that you actively trade. A mistake that I often see people doing is they place one position in the market, they don't wait for the bet to reach the market, and then they place another one, then suddenly they've got two. Just something as simple as that is something you need to be aware of. But typically the reason that you need to be aware of it as well is that somebody somewhere is probably going to see the action slightly before you. So whatever trading that you're doing, or even if you're just placing an outright bet, you've got to be aware that you're using delayed information. Somebody will see something slightly ahead of you. So whatever strategy you deploy, you must take that into account. So yeah, in-play betting has a delay. It's important to understand what that delay is, but it's also important to understand how that's going to influence the market. And the fact is that there are people out there trying to do everything to beat that. However, it's a process of anticipation nowadays, and there's a skill element to it as well. And very often what I tend to find is that the market slightly overreacts because of that. You've got people anticipating that people are going to anticipate the anticipators, and sometimes the market overshoots in either direction. So there's a little angle for you if you want to take advantage of that. But yeah, if you want to know about the in-play betting delay, why it exists, how people have got around it, and some of the tactics that are used, there you go. You probably want to go out now and buy a wireless radio, because that's an old trick that a lot of people still use now. But anyway, I hope that video has been useful for you.